We have a very special guest tonight, and I love Dream City. I gotta tell you, this is a really special place. That is worthy of applause. Please clap, as some people would say. I want to share two things, and then we'll get right into our guest. And our guest is not someone that you will always hear at a church. He does speak at a fair amount of churches, and he's become a very good friend of mine. But first, I want to just share with you, and I'm sure some of you agree, I believe self-control is one of the fruits of the Spirit. Not just I believe, it says it. And I think like perpetually furious is the best way I could put it at the mockery of the idea of justice of what I'm seeing in our country right now. This is not a political thing, okay? Not at all. If you have a love of the Lord and a love of decency, this is an insult to our customs, our traditions, to our reason, and quite honestly, every pastor in America should be speaking out about this. It is so grotesque, it is so terrible, and I mean, you know what I'm talking about. And all the while we have child sex trafficking, which praise God, Dream City does such a great job to stop, and we have to turn a blind eye to that, and I have to be lectured about somebody thinking something incorrectly and be indicted by our government. So it takes a fair amount of self-control, and I think for all of us. But I think it's really important that we stay disciplined and understand that this is evil, that this is not rational behavior, this is not justifiable behavior. You could have all sorts of mixed opinions about the former president, right? You could say every insult, I've heard them all, but to use the full force of the government to go after somebody who then wants to challenge the current administration. It's never happened in American history. It's completely unacceptable. And honestly, these people are lowlifes of what they are doing. And I know that you're not allowed to say that at a church, but I'm sorry, they're lowlifes, what they're doing. And I try to stay restrained from it, because what does it say in Jeremiah 29:7, which is our theme verse? Demand the welfare of the nation that you are in, because your welfare is tied to your nation's welfare. And when your instruments of justice can just be deployed against dissidents, people that have differences of opinion, I get asked all the question, Charlie, what can we do? And honestly, in that situation, you could pray, you could fast, but the most important thing we can do is we can dive deep into these ideas, organize our communities, take education seriously of our children, and understand that you are living through a mass demoralization campaign. The most important thing you can do is remain cheerful and joyful and not give up. They are doing this to make you try and surrender. You need to act the opposite. Do more, show up more, pray more. Because I watched this, and if it was not for my faith and for my why, yeah, I'd get demoralized, I'll be honest. It's like, my goodness, I lose track of the indictments, and I do this for a living. Superseding indictments, document indictments, it's absolutely unbelievable. But why do we get involved? Do we get involved because we think we can win, or do we get involved out of obedience? If you do what you do out of obedience, then it does not matter if all of a sudden it gets cloudy and if it gets negative. You do it because you love God and He loves you. That's why you stay involved. That's why you organize. And so I've been studying, and now this is the second thing I'm going to talk about, and then I'll welcome James. I've been studying the Old Testament. Dennis Prager did a series of lectures over a course of 15 years. How great was Prager when he had him, by the way? Was that not a great time? It was so good. And he's a Jew, but in some ways I actually like, obviously there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, he's a Bible-believing Orthodox Jew. And some people criticize, oh, Charlie, you're learning the Bible from, someone who's Jewish. I say, I actually, enjoy that because they know the Hebrew and they can teach it from an original intent standpoint. And then you could pick and choose what you want, obviously, from a Christian lens. But I find it super interesting and incredibly deep. And he put so much work into these lectures. So I'm now finally into Deuteronomy after 600 hours of listening to his lectures. Not an easy accomplishment. If you want to just give up, study Leviticus in the month of June. It's like, holy moly, the priestly garments of Leviticus 12. How does this apply to my life? Well, Prager applies it to your life. It's pretty amazing. So I've just finished, again, if one of my life's mission, our team at TPUSA Faith is here. They know that one of my life missions is to actually have the book of Numbers called what it's actually called, which is In the Wilderness. I think more people would read the book if it was called In the Wilderness. Numbers sounds like a math book, right? Like parameters, like measuring the ark or the tabernacle. Outside of like the first 6 books of Numbers, which is where we get the book, it's all naming tribes. It's an incredibly interesting book. You have spies, you have rebellion, you have treachery, you have covenants, you have talking donkeys. You got all sorts of crazy, no, literally, you got Balaam's donkey in Numbers 19. So I just finished studying it, and I love the Word of God because it speaks back to you, right? And it's just this incredible thing. If you're not a Christian, I highly recommend it. It'll change your life. So this one part really stood out to me, and it's just kind of been this, there's so many different ways to interpret this and just apply it to your life, not interpret it. So it's number in the Wilderness 11 or Numbers 11, right? Where you remember the context, right? God delivers his chosen people out of Egypt. They need or want for nothing, right? They've seen the Red Sea parted. They've seen the Nile turn to blood. I mean, they've seen incredible stuff. And they're doing nothing but complaining. And not once. I mean, they're complaining like every other chapter, right? And this one is just so incredible, which is a good trivia question, which is true or false. Cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic are mentioned in that order in the Old Testament. True, yeah. They're literally complaining that when they were slaves in Egypt, that they ate better. I'll read this in a second. And I think there's a couple lessons, and I'm going to apply it especially to the news I led with. Numbers 4. Now the rabble that was among them had a strong craving, and the people of Israel wept, they were crying, and said, oh, that we had meat to eat. We remember the fish we ate in Egypt that cost nothing. Okay, let me stop there. Why did it cost nothing? Yeah, they were slaves, yes. They were slaves. Everything is free when you're a slave. That's awfully wise when people say they want everything to be free, isn't it? Cost us nothing except our labor. The cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic. But now our strength is dried up, and there's nothing at all but this manna to look at. They had all the food that they needed, and yet they were filled with ingratitude. And it literally, the name of the chapter is The People Complain. Now it goes on, God was so displeased with this, and he comes down with fire. God does not like complainers at all. And if I were to just give a little bit of a asterisk on this, the entire American left is basically weaponized complaining. This is indistinguishable from the Marxist left. I just gotta be honest. I don't have health care, I don't have birth control, I'm not happy. Okay, great. Human nature doesn't change. But let's make sure that we are also making sure that we don't become the complainers. It's so easy, right? Because what was I doing? I'm upset, I'm angry at the injustice. What is the way to handle what's happening right now? It's not to complain. You can point out the injustice, but it's to do good. It is to do good things, not to complain and be filled with ingratitude. We still live in a free society. We still live in the greatest country ever to exist in the history of the world. And there's still a lot of fight left in this country, let me tell you what. And I think we have to be, the lesson for me is we cannot become expert complainers. We need to become doers, whatever that means in your life and whatever that calling means. So our speaker tonight is really special. I've done a series of speeches with him across the country on campuses and other venues. And so we have, up until this point, every speaker, Dennis Prager being, a practicing Jew, is the only one that wouldn't fit this criteria, has been a Bible-believing Christian. James Lindsay at one point was part of the New Atheist movement. And he's now agnostic, so we're making progress, right, James? We're moving along, we're moving. Now, I gotta be honest, it drives me nuts. And I don't care if you know anything about me, but it does drive me nuts temporarily because I get these sanctimonious emails from certain pastors and churches. Charlie, how dare you, like to Greta Thunberg, talking to me. How dare you talk to James Lindsay at a church about whatever? And I was like, well, let me first tell you about James Lindsay. He knows the Bible better than most pastors. I guarantee you that, okay? Number one. Number two, he loves the truth. Number three, he is the number one expert in America on Marxism and critical race theory. Number one, if I told you I could bring an expert up here that could tell you how to solve and properly diagnose a societal ill, I think you'd welcome that person to the church. I think you'd say, you know what can I learn? Where do I agree? Where do I disagree? He has unbelievable respect for the church, and every church that welcomes him, I could tell you, is infinitely blessed. And Dream City deserves so much credit. I called Joe and they were like, you know what, Charlie? This is great, this is awesome. We're gonna learn here. And I just think how broken the American church is, where they are so worried that I'm having James Lindsay come, and they will not even at the same time simultaneously speak out with truth against all the other stuff. Like, go take a hike. There's lots of trails around here, okay? This man, I'm telling you, he's in the trenches. He travels like 300 days a year. The books he has published will blow your mind. Race Marxism, the Marxification of education, cynical theories. I don't say this lightly. He is the number one expert at being able to explain to you the threat of how and why they're grooming your children. What is this LGBT thing and what is behind it? What is critical race theory? What drives the Marxists? And most importantly, he teaches us how to win. So let's give an enthusiastic welcome to my friend, Dr. James Lindsay. So James, welcome to Dream City.
Yeah, well, thank you all for having me. Such a warm welcome. Thank you for the introduction, Charlie. That was actually very nice. You would think some of these people would be happy that I come to a church as opposed to upset that I've come to a church, but...
I think it's awesome that James is in a church right now. I think that's so cool, right?
So you said that every time I come to a church, I bless the church, and it's very kind of you, but the church always blesses me back. I learn something new every time. For example, 10 days ago, the previous Sunday, last Sunday, I think I was flying home from the swamp, so I wasn't at church, but the previous Sunday, I actually went to church in Tampa, Florida, and they were doing a sermon on the book of Numbers. And so you were just talking about the importance of obedience, the importance of doing, the complainers in chapter 11, and the pastor was preaching out of chapter 14, and he was discussing that God was very displeased. I showed them 10 times, I'm never delivering them to what they think they want. That was the message. He's not gonna let them go to Canaan. Like, sorry, you complain too much. And so when you compare this to the Marxist left, that they're the perennial, perpetual complainers, and in fact, that's kind of a definition, a working definition for the woke is complaining about everything all the time. We can be sure that they're not going to get what they think they want. They're not going to get delivered to the land they think that they're making, that the promised land that they think they're going to have is not going to be given to them because they're complainers.
And I love that. So James, let's take a little step back. You have a PhD in mathematics. How on earth did you get into the space where now you are the armor-piercing shell against the degenerate Marxist left?
I usually get called the tip of the spear, so armor-piercing shell is way cooler. I very much like this.
Thank you.
That's really awesome. So yeah, I do have a PhD in math. I actually got fed up with the university the last 2 years I was teaching. The last year I spent in the university was 2010, to give you some timeline on this. So the issue was that they were focusing on student retention, especially for freshmen and sophomores, over all other priorities. Don't give them bad grades, don't make them feel bad, don't fail too many of them. These are the kinds of instructions that we were getting. If you fail too many kids, you're gonna have to come justify it in a faculty meeting or something, and you're gonna have to show why they did that badly. And I thought, I can't teach math. I mean, I make the joke like they took away my one joy in life as a math teacher, which is failing kids, but I actually didn't like failing kids. It's just a math thing. It's hard, math is hard. But I couldn't teach in good faith that way, so I left the university. This led me to get a job. I was a massage therapist, believe it or not. I worked with my hands, and I worked that for 10 years professionally, and it was a humbling thing to step from PhD to massage therapy until I realized that I'm actually helping people, and that's better. But I got academically bored, so I started fighting with people online, as one does, and then I encountered feminism. And I saw that it was a problem, but rather than just thinking, wow, this is mean, this is kind of, sort of man-hating, this is really kind of messed up, I thought, why do they think this way? So I started asking some of the feminists who would actually yell at me some questions. Where do you get these ideas? And they would send me papers, and I would read the papers, and I was like, whoa, this is way more messed up than I thought. But more importantly, I said, this is what's in the academic published literature, which is what our society as a secular institution treats similarly to a canon of literature like a Bible. This is what objective truth is supposed to be reflected through, and this is just poison getting dripped into it. So I attacked it. I wrote a series of fake academic papers.
This is one of the coolest things. So you do this quickly, James, because we have not unlimited time.
Yeah.
But so you basically punked the university by making them live up to their own standards by writing a series of academic journals that were so insane that they actually thought they were awesome.
Yeah, so you guys have probably heard of the Babylon Bee. I basically did the Babylon Bee to academia in 2018.
Give some examples.
Am I allowed to say some of these examples in church? Let's see. So I apologize to the pastors and everybody in the world for the first one, but it's the most famous one, so I'm going to mention it. We actually wrote a paper that said that we could determine what's going on with rape culture, so that's feminism again, if we were to examine canine rape culture at dog parks. So we would go and examine how dogs dog each other.
But they thought this was brilliant.
Oh, they thought this was the best thing in the world. They won an award for excellence in scholarship in the leading journal in the field. And the conclusion was that we can beat rape culture in society by training men the way we train dogs, like out of obedience manuals and...
But the peer review was like, this is brilliant, this is amazing. Like, professors were loving what he was publishing.
That's right, yeah. It wasn't that paper, they loved that paper. Another paper got called An Important Contribution to Knowledge, which is my favorite sentence in English. That was I don't know if I can talk about that one at church, but that was a paper that said that the reason that men are transphobic is because they don't practice putting things in their number two. And so if they practiced, then they would be less transphobic. And that was called An Important Contribution to Knowledge by an academic journal in good standing by a college professor reviewing the paper.
I just have to interject. What James is doing is going after those false gods, as it says in the Old Testament, and just crashing them and mocking them. That is such a blessing because, James, they take themselves so seriously, and eventually you got exposed with this. But how many did you get published?
So the publication process, just to be really clear, because this is a little confusing, the publication process in academia is really slow. It can take over a year from when they accept a paper till it gets published. So we actually had 7 of our papers accepted, and we had 7 more that were still under review, but 4 had actually been published out into the world, and that's how we got caught. And so the Wall Street Journal started thinking that dog paper probably wasn't legit, started asking some questions. So a journalist at the Wall Street Journal figured out what 0 academics could figure out, that paper had to be not real.
And so then you wrote a book, Cynical Theories, right, with Helen Pluckrose, and then our paths crossed during Floydapalooza, where the national religion became CRT for a short period of time. And I came across James Lindsay. He came on my podcast, and I was blown away. I was like, holy moly, this guy has read all their literature. He knows their stuff. He knows their trapdoors. He knows their one-liners. He knows their next move. And I was like, no one in the church knows this. Very few people on the right know this, especially from an academic approach. And then, James, is it fair to say you basically made it your mission in life to crush modern Marxism?
Yeah, you talk about courage and obedience. I went to my wife and I said, hey, honey, I think this is going to unravel Western civilization. She's like, all right, you okay? And I was like, can I quit my job and dedicate every moment of my waking life to reading this, studying this, exposing this, talking about this, so that hopefully we can stop it before it gets too late? And she is a woman, so she said, can you make money doing that? And I said, I don't know. And she said, you have 18 months. And I said, okay, but she's a woman, so that meant, see, because I do know what a woman is. A woman is somebody who says you have 18 months to figure out how to make money, and she means 15. Is what she really means. Like Jordan Peterson said, if you don't know what a woman is, marry one and find out. And that's right. That's the gospel of Jordan. And so we got the plane off the ground though. And so since, I guess that would have been 2018, I made that ask of my wife. I've been doing nothing. I was reading another one of their stupid books on the plane here yesterday. I don't stop. I'm always reading their stuff, find out how they think, what the next moves are.
So James, bring us into the mindset. What series of things did you read where you had that shift? You said, I've quit my job. And what did you see? What was the threat, the harbinger, the canary in the coal mine? To the people that might not believe the threat, what did you see that you said, this is going to destroy Western civilization?
Well, I mean, I've been reading the whole canon, and I already saw that this was, so there's a very famous paper from 1989, but this isn't the thing, by this woman named Kelly Oliver. And she said that it doesn't matter whether we've come to a point now where we don't have to worry about whether our theories are true or false. It just matters whether they're strategic. And I thought that, well, that's really bad. And what really changed me, though, is I wrote one of these papers, one of the fake academic articles. It was about education. And we said that what you have to do is take the privileged kids, find out who they are with these little tests. And then when you figure out who the privileged kids are, you abuse them out of their privilege. But we're going to do it with compassion because it's supposed to be funny. And the peer review, so some professor from very highly established journal, this is Hypatia for anybody who cares to look this up. It's a very famous, very established journal, a very high ranking and respected journal in feminist philosophy, wrote back and said, well, we love the idea of this abusing the kids out of their privilege and the white fragility that you used, but you can't use compassion because it may recenter the needs of the privileged students and thus multiply the problem. And I thought, this ends in genocide. If you are going to use abuse to overcome a character defect and compassion is not allowed to be directed toward the people in case it makes them the center of attention again, this ends nowhere but somewhere very bad. So I sat at that. I said it was a seed of a genocide. God, I got criticized for that. And I thought for about 2 or 3 weeks, then I thought, I have to do this. I have to. And I went to my wife, and I already told you that part of the story. And so it was something the peer reviewers said to me that made me do this.
And James, you kind of got known as the critical race theory guy, and then you got into the trans thing, and then the queer theory thing. So many different dimensions for us to unpack here. But if you were to describe critical race theory as succinctly as possible, how would you do that?
Well, I wrote a book called Race Marxism that you just talked about, and the first sentence, I wrote a preface, but after that, the first sentence of the first chapter is critical race theory, noun, like it's a dictionary, calling everything you want to control racist until you control it. And that is the definition of critical race theory. If I want to control this church, I call it racist until I'm on the board. If I want to control a university, I call it racist until I'm the university provost.
The military.
If I want to control the military, if I want to control you, I call you racist until I control you. And if you give in and say, well, yeah, okay, maybe I messed up. I recognize my crimes from the perspective of CRT, and I apologize, and I promise to do better, they've got you. They're controlling you. They have controlled you, and you've already forfeited that portion of your soul to them.
Queer theory.
Queer theory is the exact same thing. It is calling everything homophobic or transphobic until you control it. That's all this comes down to over and over and over again. Queer theory is actually a little more subtle. It is a war, an all-out war on the idea of the normal, that anything can be considered within bounds as normal behavior and other things can be considered out of bounds as deviant or perverse or abnormal behavior.
Does that include pedophilia?
That definitely includes pedophilia, absolutely includes pedophilia. That if we stigmatize that, well, that means that somebody gets to say, hey, Charlie, I'm normal and I think that's bad, therefore I'm just exerting my power as somebody who declared myself normal to be able to keep the pedophiles out of positions of authority and acceptance and celebration.
Where do drag queens come into this?
Drag queens are like the priests doing a baptism or an initiation. So one of the key ideas of queer theory is that there are these weird binaries, masculine, feminine, gay, straight, you have that idea. But one of the key binaries that they focus on is what's called innocence, like childhood innocence versus initiation. And so drag queens, in a paper they wrote themselves called Drag Pedagogy about what they do, are meant to be a preparatory, this is their words, I'm quoting from memory, a preparatory introduction to alternate modes of kinship and living queerly. So sometimes I get in trouble because I said that OK Groomer thing. I got kicked off Twitter for OK Groomer for a number of months until Elon brought me back. And the left was very upset about that when I came back. So I get these interviews. I did this interview with a BBC reporter one time. I'm on the Zoom with him or whatever, and he says, well, don't you think that the word groomer is a little bit inappropriate? And I was like, let me read to you from this paper. And I read the preparatory introduction to alternate modes of kinship and living queerly. And I said, I'm fine, I accept, whatever. You say what you say. Tell me a better word for that than groomer. And he said, well, yes. But don't you think it's still dangerous to point it out? And I was like, no, it's dangerous to not point it out. And they did cut that out of the interview.
So we have queer theory, we have the groomer stuff, we have the critical race theory. Is it fair to say that children are being intentionally targeted for, let's just say, sexually perverse means to strip them their innocence away and destroy the American family?
That's 100% accurate. It's also to strip them of being able to find solace or hope or ground under their feet in their faith. If you get people worked up, especially children worked up in their sexuality, they're not going to be mentally well. We've talked about before, early childhood development knows that children separate the world into some pretty tight, if anybody who has kids knows, it's pretty serious with the distinctions. It turns out that the distinctions that children draw out are adult versus child and male versus female. And these are their first ideas of identity. I'm a boy, you're a girl, you're a man, you're a woman. They know those four categories and they're really strict about it. If you ever talk to a kid, they get a little weird about it, in fact. But that's natural and important because they're learning to build an identity. Queer theory confuses that and it gets them lost as to who they are so that they have to defer to, say, an expert or a teacher or a trusted adult in order to figure out basic questions like, what is a woman? We all laughed when the Ketanji Brown Jackson, the Supreme Court Justice, couldn't answer what is a woman on the spot in front of Marshall Blackburn, Senator Blackburn. We all laughed, but the point was, what Ketanji Brown Jackson said is, I can't answer the question for myself. I have to ask a guru. I have to ask some wizard who can tell me when, because if Charlie right now stood up here and said, for the remainder of the evening, I identify as a woman, Media Matters is going to write an article before we get off the stage explaining why Charlie Kirk wasn't really doing it in good faith, so it didn't count. They know when it counts and they know when it doesn't count. So we have to ask a guru who's going to tell us. Well, you do this to children, you get them worked up in their identity. They're forming their identity. It's all confused. Well, I can be a boy today, a girl tomorrow. I don't know who I like, and it's okay to do whatever I want. And I have a special relationship with my trusted adult, and they tell me to keep secrets from my parents. What's a good word for that, groomer? What they're going to do is they're going to come home, and when you say, I don't think this is good, the school's already taught them, and the media have already taught them, well, your parents are going to reject you, so your parents are not the trusted adult. The school's going to protect you from that. They separate you there. And then they say, well, we're going to take you to church and get you straightened out and get you in a good, healthy community or something like this. And they say, well, the Bible's outdated, the Bible's patriarchal, the Bible's homophobic, the Bible, blah, 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 blah. And then you've separated them from family, you've separated them from faith, and you've confused their minds so they don't know who they are and have to ask a trusted adult to know who they are.
It's pretty good, isn't it?
And it's all set up by screwing around with their skin color first so that they feel like that's the way they can have a positive sense of self. You tell them that they're awful for their skin color using critical race theory, and if they try to be an activist or an ally or whatever, it's not good enough. They're doing it to satisfy themselves or doing it to escape more criticism. But if they adopt a gender or sexual identity outside of the norm, all of a sudden they get celebrated, they get held up on a pedestal, nobody can question it, whatever they say they are in this hour or this week or this day is what they are, and they find a sense of positive self-worth. We just asked at the TPUSA chapter leadership, you asked, there's a room of 700 college and high school.
Of our top leaders, yeah.
Top leaders, and you said, how many of you go to a campus where you feel like the social environment makes it cool for you to be homosexual? Almost every kid
Every hand goes up. That it's not just okay, there's an incentive structure. You get extra points, rewards, and privileges if you're gay or trans, and if you're straight, you get punished or treated differently.
That's right.
So why would they want that? Why do they want a gay country, James?
Well, they don't want a gay country, Charlie. They want a destabilized country because stability prevents revolutions. So what they want is they want children who don't know who they are, but know that they need to be radical and fight against the society that just doesn't make sense and has been cheating them and people like them all along. In other words, just like when Mao Zedong radicalized the youth and created a red guard to go tear down old society, they want to create a rainbow guard who's all hopped up in these sexual identities and send them out to tear down society. But they also want them to not have any landing pad. They want them not to be able to go to their parents, not to be able to go to their families, not be able to go to their church, not be able to go to actual, stable places that they might have in their lives with actual genuine authorities who love and care for them, to be able to find themselves. What they need is a population, a generation of completely broken and destabilized people who are ready to flip over society because they feel like they've been cheated.
Marxism always tries to destroy three things. If they do these three things, they get in power: family, religion, property. You can describe that in 10 seconds or less to every one of your family or friends. You can make a bumper sticker. Marxism must destroy family, religion, property. Family, religion, property. Those three things. They could do that, they're in charge. James, some people in this audience might be saying, all right, James, you're over-exaggerating. This is not happening in Scottsdale. This is not happening. By the way, it's happening at Scottsdale Unified School District. They are grooming your kids. They're coming after them, and they're turning them gay and trans in a way that you might not believe. But some people I hear, oh, my church, my school is wonderful. Unless it's Dream City Christian Turning Point Academy, I roll my eyes. James, is it widespread? Is this just like on the edges, or how widespread is this exactly?
This is, to use one of their favorite words, they have made this systemic. It is virtually everywhere. It doesn't matter how allegedly red your state is, this is virtually everywhere. And Arizona, unfortunately, is one of these kind of purple-looking states. It's very red, though, but it's weirdly purple. So it is most definitely here in Arizona. I'm speaking next in a couple of days to your neighbor to the north in Utah, actually in Salt Lake City, which they affectionately sometimes now refer to as the San Francisco of the desert. It is most definitely all through that. That's supposedly very conservative Mormon country. It's all through that. Fakest red state in the country is Utah. It's in my state of Tennessee for absolute certain. It's in Texas all over the place. They're provoking in Texas. I do a lot in Idaho. There's one of the reddest states
all over
in the country.
Idaho.
It's all over Idaho.
So James, if there was a devil, I believe there is a devil, would he make queer theory?
I mean, yes, that's exactly the thing you would want to make. You would want to lure people into initiation that separates them from their family, that separates them from their faith, that confuses them about who they are, that makes it impossible for them to discern the truth for themselves, to understand objective truth without deferring to, some evil priest or something, these gurus or wizards or whatever we want to call them, gender studies professors. That's exactly what you would do. And then at the same time, I mean, from a biblical perspective, you're inviting them into sin after sin after sin after sin.
Well, and so, James, I want to zero in on this. Why is the church, in your estimation, you're a guest speaker at churches, why is the church so unbelievably cowardly and largely silent on these issues?
I mean, everybody wants to get along and go along and be nice, and frankly, it's been a little while since people have been really drilling down, as far as I can tell, into the truth. There's been this huge movement for the last 10 years looking from the outside of, it's changed in the last couple of years thanks to you and the pastors that you've been working with and some others out there. But there's just been this, oh yeah, that's great, whatever you're into, yeah, that's great. Then there is no let's drill down to what's really true. Let's drill down to what it really says. And nobody wants to offend anybody. There's this kind of, perfectionism and winsomeness and all of this stuff that's kind of infected the church. Like I don't get it, Charlie. I mean, I get it. I don't want to step up here in a church and be all like, let me interpret the gospel for you. But I don't think that nice was Jesus's brand. He's flipping over tables.
In
what
fact,
did he say this is actually pertinent for an action item for people too. It's not really, I'm kind of wedging it in a little to be frank with you, but in Matthew 10:14, Jesus very famously says, if you go and you tell them the words, I don't have this word for word, I apologize, but if you go and you tell them your word and they won't listen to you, when you leave the house, shake the dust off your feet. It's a very famous passage in Matthew. What's he saying? Well, you go and you try to plead with somebody, you try to get them to hear the truth and they don't want to hear it, and you're like, okay. And you turn and go. You don't plead with them. You don't beg with them. You don't bend the truth to try to get them to come in, to come to your house, to your word, to whatever it is, to your church. And this is relevant to what we were actually just saying because, sorry, because when you said, would the devil make queer theory, I've been pretty well convinced over my couple of years now of studying this is that the way that somebody sells their soul, there are a number of ways, but the primary way, the easiest way that people sell their soul, they don't come over here to the table and have a contract with like a guy that's all black with fire and, a golden fiddle or whatever. They don't sign that way. What they do is they tell a lie to fit in. They tell a lie to fit in, they give away a little bit of their soul. I just want to be in a place where everybody feels like they belong, so I'm going to not tell the truth to make more people feel like they're welcome here. And that's selling a little bit of your soul. Now, when an individual does that, it's bad, and there's a way to fix it. It's called repentance, and then you can come to forgiveness. But when a church does it, there's something just brutally bad about that.
Nice is nowhere in the Bible. The word does not exist. It is a New Age 1500s Latin word that means ignorant. Literally, the etymology of nice meant stupid person. They did not kill Jesus because he was nice. They killed Jesus because he told the truth. And he rose from the grave because he is truth and he is the Son of God. And so,
Charlie, the truth isn't nice.
The truth is not nice. Now, we must be loving in our presentation, but you cannot have love without truth.
Yeah, otherwise it's lies, which is...
Exactly.
The truth is not nice, though. You have to, it says fear God. You have to fear the truth in exactly the same way. If I became convinced of a delusion right now that I could climb up here on the balcony and jump off and everything's going to be totally okay, like nothing bad's going to happen, and I firmly believe that reality, the truth, is going to correct me when I hit the ground. The truth is not going to be nice to me. And Charlie saying, yeah, your jacket works just like wings. You'll be great, James. Go on up. He's not loving me in that moment. He's like, James, brother, you're not okay. Something happened. I don't know. Maybe the bubbly water you drank was spiked or something. We got to get you to a hospital. We got to figure out what's going on. That is what truth looks like, and that's what actually loving and caring for somebody.
And the American church says, oh, I don't want to judge. Happy jump. That's the American church. Because they don't want to be deemed unloving. When their flock is about to jump off the balcony, they're afraid that they're going to offend them before they commit suicide. That's the American church. So James, distinctions. Let's talk about this, then we'll do some questions.
Yeah.
You and I really harmonize on this. Distinctions are what keep us free. Distinctions are what make sense of an otherwise very confusing world. The distinctions set up in Genesis 1 through 11. Man and woman, good and evil, holy, profane, God and nature. Riff on this a little bit.
Well, I was reading Genesis while you were talking to the group upstairs a little bit, by the way, and I noticed the Genesis 1:1 already has a distinction in it. God created the heavens and the earth, which means they're not the same thing. You're already distinguishing heavens from earth. Those are two different things. And he separates the waters on the second day, and then he's creating light and dark, morning and evening. They're not the same. We have man and woman. They're not the same. Now, when you start to confuse distinctions, which is what the left's modus operandi is, it is to confuse distinctions. It is, in fact, rooted in an ancient heretical evil religion that's called Hermeticism. We don't have to get into the details of that, but the general thrust of that religion, which is Marxism, woke, all this are just today's manifestations of that heresy. They believe that the true God is completely unified and perfectly unified with no distinctions, no separation of anything. We are all one. This kind of mentality. And the idea is that all the distinctions in the world are actually illusions that were put forth by people who don't want us to understand the full truth or don't have the full truth. So we have to transcend the distinctions. The Marxist word for this in German is Aufheben, and the translation of that in Marxist English is sublation. We're going to go to a higher level and understand that the distinctions are actually not real. So man and woman are not truly different from one another. Why are they not truly different from one another? Well, there's sometimes a man can be a woman and sometimes a woman can be a man, and we've got to have a gender studies expert to tell us when it's real and when it's not. In other words, we've got to have a special priest who has magic powers who can tell us reality for us. Good and evil, well, simple. Right and wrong, simple. Those are relative now. They're not.
Cain and Abel. It's very clear.
It's the exact same story again and again. So what you have in the Bible and what you have in reality are distinctions. Wisdom is actually very clearly understanding distinctions. the Bible is a great guide to understanding it. It starts off with this huge amount of, here are some really important, very basic, hey kids, this is some basic distinctions.
Well, and it's important, everybody, because every other belief system prior to the Word of God, prior to God's chosen people, they believed a variety of different things that are exactly the same things that we're fighting right now. What are those things? Such as pagan river civilization type beliefs where you worship the earth, right? Where you worship the sun, you worship nature. The Bible says, no, God spoke nature into existence. That you don't worship it, God is above nature. How about this? Morality. Where do you find such morality? The river civilization would say that the high priest would tell us what is right, or the Pharaoh would tell us is right and wrong. No, we know right or wrong because God tells us what is right and wrong through his revealed law, and it wasn't that way immediately. It started with consciousness, wasn't enough. Noahic covenant, wasn't enough. And then endless amounts of rules and rules and rules and more rules, and 613 rules. And then eventually we get, to the new covenant. The 10 Commandments in particular, though, shall not, do not. It's very clear that we're fighting our own broken nature. But this is what's so incredibly important, everybody, is that if you read the Old Testament, the first 5 books of the Bible, but especially Genesis 1 through 11, it is an all-out war on the woke. And I'll prove it to you. They want to worship the earth, and they use an excuse of climate change. We're told to take dominion over the earth.
What'd they just do? They just said they're going to have to sacrifice 200,000 cows to the earth god
Bingo.
To stop climate change. And what was it, Ireland or Scotland or whatever?
They believe human beings are an accident of Darwinian evolution. There's nothing unique. We believe in Genesis 1:26 and 1:27, where God said, let us make man in our image. Which, by the way, it uses the plural Elohim, and that's the Trinity right there in the first book of Genesis. It's a nice little nugget of biblical trivia for you. How about the distinction between holy and profane? This is really where the book of Leviticus, I think the best lesson can be told. That there must be distinctions between things that we deem holy. Think about how many things in society that used to be holy that aren't. The American flag being one of them. Used to be where you wouldn't even dare think about burning a flag, putting it on the ground. Now you can just see it kind of cast aside. The new holy object is the trans flag. And you can't profane that. What would happen if you profane the trans flag, James? You go to jail.
In some countries you will.
Hate crime.
Hate crime.
Every society needs something holy. And the holy and the ethical are directly tied together, and I'll prove it to you. Leviticus has all these rules. You're like, goodness, what the priests wear and what you eat and shellfish. And then boom, out of nowhere, Leviticus 19, love your neighbor as yourself. How many Christians know that when Jesus said all the laws of the prophet hang upon these 2 things, love your God with all your soul, strength, and mind, and love your neighbor as yourself? Because the holy and the ethical are directly related. If you do not have the holy, you cannot have the ethical. The Hebrew word for holy is separate, different, protected. If you don't have distinctions, by definition, you cannot have rules for life. James, final thoughts.
Well, I mean, they call themselves progressive, but what they are is transgressive, and that's exactly what they're transgressive of. They are trying to elevate the profane, and the way that they do that is by trying to inject they call this progress, but what they're doing is injecting some profanity into that which is holy over and over and over again. This is called transgression. It is not called progression. And that is actually one of the chief deceptions, and I say that with a capital D, that they possibly could foist on humanity. Then they follow that up. If you ask me what would happen if you were to profane the trans flag, they come at you and call you a transphobe, and did you committed a hate crime? In other words, they are capital A accusers. So you have deceivers who become accusers the second you call out their lies for what they are. And so again, I circle back to the big point, Charlie. You asked me, would the devil create these things? I don't know, given what I know about what's said about the devil, what else would be created? This is the usurping of worldly authority rather than true authority in order to distract and distort people and pull them into perversion and pull them away from the truth and to pull them away from repentance and to pull them away from the holy. What else would the devil make? There's no better definition.
Genesis, Job, Matthew, Revelation. What do we know about Satan? He's a deceiver. And Satan means literally prosecutor in the Hebrew. And what does it say in Revelation? He led a rebellion against the Lord. In fact, the original Greek is usurpation, James, a usurper. He's unsuccessful. Paul calls Satan the god of this world. Jesus called him the prince of this world. We are on enemy-occupied territory. If you were Satan, you would launch queer theory and critical race theory and go after children. If the church doesn't stand boldly for this, the church is good for nothing, everybody. This is a spiritual war in front of us. Let's do some questions and keep this going. So let's start lining up. And James, while we line up for questions here, and please, let's keep the questions around these topics if we can. James, how can people support you? Books, podcasts, all that stuff.
I have a website that is newdiscourses.com. I put out lots of podcast articles. All the books are listed there. You can find it all there, newdiscourses.com. There's a support button if you care to do that. I'm not asking for it. You're more than welcome, though. You can go there, newdiscourses.com. Everything else is easy to find from there.
Okay, let's dive in. We have limited time. We want to go as many questions as possible. We'll start here and we'll get going.
G'day, Charlie and James. I travelled all the way from Australia last year for the elections to knock on doors in the heat and stand for 6 hours outside of a polling booth. And whilst I was here, I got to leave Charlie a soft toy koala for your daughter, who was newborn at the time. I hope you got it. If you didn't, your staff have got some explaining to do. Okay. All right. But my question is, God doesn't make mistakes. So why do we have Katie Hobbs and Joe Biden?
Okay, great question. God doesn't make mistakes, but we certainly do as human beings. So God loves us so much that he gives us the freedom to say no to him. Otherwise, that's not love. With that being said, I also believe that, remember, we're in enemy-occupied territory, that Satan is the prince of this world, prince of the air. Why do we have these treacherous fools occupying? Honestly, I could go through the elections and all this. It's because the church has not played its role. If the church was active, we would not have these people in government positions. It's just the way it is. 30 to 40 million evangelical Christians did not vote in the 2022 midterms. They did not care to vote, and the numbers show it. It's irrefutable. So the Christian church does not care enough to save the civilization. I'll make one other thing. How do we act when we get a miracle? This is why, I just love the Bible. It's so beautiful, because I'm sure many of you say, okay, if I saw God split the Red Sea, I would be a believer. Okay, that's all God, send me a sign. Okay, come on. No, it's not. No. Look at the Old Testament. How many miracles did God have to perform? And like 2 days later, who's this God? And I'll prove it to you. How many Christians even acknowledged the irrefutable miracle that within a couple years, we were able to overturn Roe versus Wade? That is a modern miracle, period. The fact that you have a guy go down a golden escalator that's never run before, say some very colorful things and still win a surprise election to give you 3 justices. You know, 99% of American churches did not even mention that Roe versus Wade was repealed, let alone say thank you. So God does not make mistakes, but I'll be honest, America is in a state of rebellion against God. Thank you so much. We'll get to the next one.
Actually, if I might, Charlie, I could pull back to that Numbers 14 thing I saw at church like last week or whatever. The truth is that, you know, the story there is that God's given 10 signs. 10 is this, you know, symbolic number. Maybe there were more or whatever, but 10 signs that were supposed to be unambiguous. And what you have is a bunch of people who didn't believe the signs. I can tell you right now, not to compare myself to anybody in these stories, but I can tell you right now, having spoken up about this issue for a very long time, it's been very difficult to convince people that things that are happening are actually happening. I told people in early 2020, February 2020, that worked for the Pentagon, I said, there's a cultural revolution like China had coming using critical race theory within the next 6 to 12 months. And they were like, no, that's not possible. And of course, it kicked off 3 months later in May. And so I think that it's actually very important for us to realize how much more visible a lot of these things are, and how many more people are going to be activated when the hard part starts, which is still coming, because we have these examples so clearly in front of our face. And I think it's very important, pulling back to the lesson the pastor at the church I was at preached about Numbers 14, it's very important to understand that we have to realize, especially if you guys are believers, you have to realize that all of those signs weren't given just to kind of like show off. He wasn't doing fireworks. The point was, you should have been able to trust me before. I've proven myself. You should be able to trust me now. And that's where deliverance is going to come from on the other side. So you've got to be able to trust that this is an eye-opening experience, and we have to take advantage of these high crimes and treasons that we're seeing happen all around us so that we can awaken our fellow people to say no, so that we don't get tricked, say like we did when they told us there'd just be 2 weeks to flatten the curve, and we all were like, oh yeah, 2 weeks, okay, that sounds great. Okay, yeah, 2 weeks.
Next question.
Hi, James. I want to thank you for reaching out to moms and befriending moms. I run the Twitter account for Arizona Women of Action, and I thank you so much when you amplify my messaging. One of the most serious things coming to education is community schools, as you've talked about many times. We have a good conservative superintendent of public instruction. How do we get the message across about how serious that is?
I mean, so as somebody who's gone around the country over and over and over again and tried to get people to understand important messages, what I've learned is that if you keep saying it, people start hearing it, especially as it becomes more visible, kind of even reflecting back off the last question. So the way that you're going to, practically speaking, the way that you're going to get the message is that you don't quit. You keep saying it, you keep sharpening your message, you keep paying attention, getting the feedback, what works and what doesn't, what's reaching people, what's making people ask questions. And you have to keep putting the information out. You have to keep doing everything that you can. I'm happy to continue to amplify what you're doing. I think it's great. So thank you for that. I think I don't want to get lost in the topic of community schools, but I think that what we have to start doing as a broader, bigger picture topic, and it doesn't matter whether you're invested in this education fight or whether you're not invested in the education fight, what we have to start doing is anytime you hear some word that sounds like it came off of a government sheet, like community schools, maybe it's time to start asking questions. And it's time for you to start telling your neighbor, hey, that term sounded awfully like it came off of a UN watch list or something. Maybe we should ask what that word really means. Let's dig into it. Let's stop taking their terms at face value. Oh, community school, it's about the community, it's good. No, dig deeper and just keep pushing that theme. Dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper. And I think that it cracks through. You just have to keep going.
The truth will win. Next question.
Dr. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming. I first heard about your name because my professor at Colorado Christian recommended 2 of your books, and next semester we get to read Cynical Theories for Literary Criticism, and so I really look forward to that. But my question for you has to do with Maoism. Would you elaborate on your view of Maoism in America and maybe offer some resources, books, or podcasts for people who want to write on it further?
Yeah, I mean, so what's happening in this country right now is a Maoist-style cultural revolution. If you don't understand that, then you probably need to start studying the history. This isn't a hard thing. Believe it or not, I'm not usually a big promoter of something like Wikipedia, but you can actually start there and look up Mao's Cultural Revolution and learn the history. There are going to be resources, and there probably already are some resources coming through Turning Point. Charlie and I have been talking about it.
We were thinking about something around the term American Maoism, because I think it's perfect. We overplay the Nazi references and the USSR references, and we underplay the Mao. It is way more Maoist than it is anything else.
Right, so earlier when I was referring to the idea of creating a rainbow guard by using critical race theory to pressure identity categories into adopting a particular revolutionary identity category in the trans or the gender minorities or sexual minorities, whatever, that was a Maoist tactic. For example, Mao used identity politics, and identity politics push was Maoism. He created red classes for communism, the revolutionaries, and black classes. He bullied the people who were in black classes, sometimes very viciously. He had the youth be the rebellion that did it, and all you had to do was sign up to be a revolutionary and start going through thought reform or brainwashing, and then you could be in the red class and get treated marginally better or even a lot better if you ended up joining the party. That's a Maoist tactic. Another Maoist tactic that should feel very familiar, he stated a formula. He used to consolidate power in the CCP before he took power in 1949. He used this formula, and he used it again and again and again throughout the 1950s, and he used it again and again in the Cultural Revolution, which is called unity, criticism, unity. So he said, create the desire for unity, followed by teaching people right from wrong through criticism and struggle, followed by a new unity on a new basis, and the new basis was socialist discipline that you'd have to accept upon yourself, and then you could have freedom. Well, we just want to make a church where everybody feels like they belong. And that's desire for unity. But we can't have unity because there are some racists and transphobes here who make it feel like somebody can't belong. So we've got to go ahead and criticize racism, systemic racism, transphobia, homophobia. We've got to all do it from a critical perspective so that we can understand that blah, blah, blah. And we're going to struggle session anybody, a pastor, a member of the church or whatever, who doesn't get on board until they adopt the new basis of understanding racism according to CRT, understanding transphobia according to queer theory, and so on. And then we can have a new unity in the church on a new basis. And if you remember when Mr. Biden took office, I almost said got elected. When Mr. Biden took office, the first thing he pushed was, now we're going to have unity. We're going to have unity. And conservatives, you didn't know you won a giant war against that administration that day, said, according to who, kind of as a nation. And we rejected the idea that after all this pandemic of the unvaccinated stuff, all this division, all these things that he did, that the Democrats had been doing and that they had been doing for so many months before, when we rejected that and said, we're not going to accept your basis for unity as the unity for the country, we beat that. And they never talk about unity anymore at all because we beat that initiative. And that was Maoism that we beat. A huge Maoist initiative. And the parallels are overwhelming. I encourage you to look it up. I encourage you also to listen to a friend of mine named Xi Van Fleet.
Oh, she's amazing.
She is spelled X-I. Van Fleet is spelled the way you think it is.
She's incredible.
She's incredible. She's got talks on YouTube. She does things. She has an amazing historical Twitter account. You can go find her very easily, Xi Van Fleet, and look up some of her talks where she does the parallels. It will open your eyes in a way that will just completely blow your mind. You've got to check her out.
Yeah, and just to add on a little bit, it's also ongoing because the Maoist regime actually has not lost power. It's the same philosophy, a little bit more gangster than it was back then, less ideological, more gangster. Would you agree?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it picked up also this fake market they have going on from Deng Xiaoping. They've got a whole plan for this.
But
it's the same program.
Is Mao's project. And so it's ongoing. Social credit system, mercantilism, it's ongoing. And I would encourage you, I'm going to post this on charliekirk.com. You can actually find it currently on dennisprager.com. And a very hard to get biography of Mao that actually has been memory holed, because it's so good. It was written by someone who actually knew his family. And you want to get a picture into someone who I believe is the closest thing to Lucifer. Joseph Stalin and Mao Hitler are the three most evil people of the 20th century. And they're as close to like manifestation of unclean spirit that I think you'll ever see. I'll stop there, but...
I'll just add quickly to really encourage you to look up Xi, because she lived through the Cultural Revolution. She was classified as black class in the Cultural Revolution. Her family had too much money, which was very little. And so she was bullied as black class in the Cultural Revolution. So she lived through it, came to this country in the 1980s, loves this country, is trying to save this country, is putting it all on the line for this country. So she has lived experience of Maoism, and believe it or not, the left doesn't care about her lived experience because only theirs counts.
All right, here we go.
Hello, my name is Rebecca Jensen. And as a 13-year-old, what can I do to help my country?
As a 13-year-old, by the way, she's homeschooled. She does a great job. Classical Conversations, right? You do a great job. So, James, I mean, I could say get involved with Turning Point USA, obviously. But James, this is an interesting thing. We actually need people younger and younger to start to care and fight.
Yeah, well, what you have to understand, since we just talked about Mao, is that Mao used people your age to overthrow society. And people your age are extremely sensitive, for reasons that are mostly pretty good, to their social environment. And so creating a social environment where everybody's just kind of trending into the left progressive view has been something they've been very successful at, using the schools, using entertainment, using just social media, and all of this kind of bullying. We talked, Charlie mentioned earlier that there's a new study showing that young men are trending more and more conservative, but the same study actually showed that young women are still trending more and more left. Well, it's very important for people in your age group to become somebody who stands out from that crowd, which is very hard at your age. It's very hard to stand up to your friends and say, you know what, this isn't good, this isn't true, this isn't right, this is actually dangerous. And so what we need are people in that social circle. It's one thing for an old dude like me to sit up here on this stage, an old dude like Charlie to sit on the stage and rant down at the kids. They won't listen the same way as if it's their friends. So people your age getting together and saying, you know what, no, we're gonna do right and wrong, we're gonna do good and evil, we're gonna do true and false, and we're gonna care about those things is gonna be a huge difference in putting the brakes on the strongest wedge that they have to take away our society.
And in the immediate, get as many of your friends to come to America Fest in December. Tickets are now available. It's amfest.com. It will be the most extraordinary speakers ever, and we're gonna partner with Dream City on some stuff. We're gonna be promoting it. Get your early bird tickets. Luke is gonna speak there. We're gonna do we have worship night. We're gonna do all sorts of fun stuff. It's a great opportunity to celebrate the country. James speaks every year. It's amfest.com. If you have no idea what I'm talking about, it's right near Christmas. I think it's after all of your Christmas services, Joe, right? And it is very important. Phoenix Convention Center. The dates I'm gonna mess up, amfest.com. Get as many of your colleagues to come, okay? And you already have your tickets. And yes, students basically always get in free. It's you guys that have to pay. So yes, next question. My man from Dream City Christian at Turning Point Academy.
Hey Charlie, I was just wondering, what would you say to someone who feels mixed up inside and wondering what gender am I and what am I?
Yes, so that is not your job. So your job is to be a friend to that person and to love on that person. An adult needs to step in and correct the error very quickly. Hopefully a parent or an actual trusted adult. Let me point more broadly to all of you. There is an unbelievably great book out right now by Dr. Miriam Grossman. Can't remember the name of it. It's trans something, but I know the author. She was on my podcast.
Transnation or something.
Yeah, I think it's like Lost in Transnation.
That's it.
That's exactly
Lost
what it
in
is.
Transnation.
And I hope all of you are able to really understand the gravity of how basically the entire pediatric industry has been captured by this trans ideology. It is now trained, pediatricians are now trained to ask kids when their parents are out of the room, do you feel as if you're a different gender? They are trained. They are actively seeking out new trans patients. There are hundreds of chemical castration and medieval butchering clinics now across the country. Here's what I know this is different than your question, but it's an important thing. I got in a pretty heated argument with somebody who said, Charlie, I'm sick of hearing about the trans stuff. You gotta stop talking about it. It's gonna go away. It's becoming less popular. And I said, with all due respect, you're a moron. I mean that. It is an industry that now pharmaceutical companies are making billions of dollars on. This is not some fad. This is now a profit model for the most gross people in America. Pfizer is going to make billions of dollars on kids in this state. And so adults need to step in. The way that we used to handle what's called gender dysphoria is through a clinically proven thing called watchful waiting, which is in almost every case, kid who's 11 years old, almost every single time has some sort of parent trauma, was molested, father left them or something, okay? It's really misdiagnosed puberty anxiety is what transgenderism is. It's like young ladies that might be going through a lot of body changes very quickly and they are not socially accepted the way they want to. They see a TikTok video, I think I'm a man. A pediatrician is now no longer allowed to say, no, you're not. They will lose their license in Washington. They will lose their license in Illinois. They will lose their license in New York. Instead of saying, no, let's have a conversation, let's slow down. They are required by law to refer them to a gender-affirming clinic, which will give them irreversible pharmacological agents that will slow down their puberty and castrate them. So what are you supposed to do? You're supposed to love on those people and be a friend to them, but also say, hey, maybe you're not who you feel you are, if you have the courage to say that to your friend. But man, I'll be honest, we as adults, we have to start stepping up, because this is going to go down as the modern lobotomies of our time. This is a butcher operation, everybody. There will be this is not small, hundreds of thousands of kids that will be left with their parts chopped off and puberty stopped in their 20s and 30s that will say, why was I lied to? We need to sue these doctors. We need to sue these associations. We need to make them go bankrupt, and we need to put this back in the pit of hell where it came from. My friend Rachel. Hi, Rachel, how are you?
Hey, Charlie. Dr. Lindsay, I wanted to say thank you very much for your work. I just finished your book, The Marxification of Education, and as a homeschooler, I appreciate all that you do. And Charlie, thank you for introducing us to James and for all the work that your team does on a constant basis. Now, knowing that you're a PhD of math, and I know that you love math, do you want to review a math curriculum?
I mean, I don't want to review one in the moment, in the next 40 seconds or whatever. I could try to look at one. I will warn you, I'm not trying to try to back out of this. I will warn you, I never worked with elementary curriculum, and there are certain things that are necessary pedagogical things that are for teaching children. Have you heard how I talk? Do you think that I'm good at teaching children? I struggle with grown-ups. I struggled with grad students. So I am willing to take a look. I am also probably more willing to try to direct it to people who have the more pertinent expertise. I mean, I'm a mathematician by training 12 years ago, which means I can't add. Like, that's not a thing mathematicians can do anymore. We don't do arithmetic. I've got your calculus wherever you need it or whatever. So I will take a look if I can find time and we can get it to me, but I'm not making very many promises with it.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you. Okay.
Good evening, gentlemen. Thank you. Don Dickinson, old guy. Unfortunately, I wasn't learning this stuff at 13 like the young lady did, or the gentleman that was here just a minute ago. But going back to something that you asked, Charlie, was did the devil or Satan, or would devil or Satan, whatever word you use, set up these battles, these LGBTQ, all these things? So that led me to think, because it sounded like, Dr. Lindsay, that you may have read Napoleon Hill's interview with, what was the? Outwitting the Devil. Thank you. Who said that? Obviously, we've got some people who have seen that book. Have you read that? And would you, I presume you would recommend that to others?
Say the title one more time, I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. I probably don't need
Outwitting the Devil?
Outwitting the Devil, Napoleon Hill. It was his last published work. His wife made sure that it was not published till well after her death, because it was going to be so controversial. In today's day and age, it's probably not that controversial, but it's kind of the conservative side, or the conservative opposite of Hillary Clinton's mentor.
Rules for Radicals. Saul Alinsky, Rules for Radicals.
It's probably the polar opposite of that.
Yeah.
Have either of you gentlemen read that?
I haven't read it, but I'll look into it. I love book recommendations.
I have
Thank
to
you.
give the same exact answer. I actually have not heard of that, so I'm looking forward to looking into it.
And the dedication of Rules for Radicals is to Lucifer. Interesting. That's Hillary's icon. Thank you. If you, I meant Saul Alinsky, not Lucifer, everybody, obviously. If there was a Jezebel, it would be Hillary Clinton, yes.
Well, Charlie and Dr. Lindsay, thank you so much for coming and raising the awareness and the information that you have been trying so brilliantly to inform us. And I think that the church needs to wake up to where our culture is, and that the reality of the other side agenda to destroy America, we know it, destroying the fundamental values, etc. The question that I have is this. Many of us have been praying for revival, like 2 Chronicles 7:14. I don't need to quote that. But the last chapter of the Bible, Revelation chapter 22, the angel is like getting ready to say goodbye to John the disciple. After all the revelation, he gave them a very powerful instruction that I think is very applicable and powerful to the church in America today. And what he said is in that one verse, 22:11, the angel said to John, "Let evil be evil and the filthy be filthy, but let the holy be holy and the righteous be righteous. You mentioned earlier about the distinction between left and right. And here's instruction for the church to be holy and righteous. What does that mean? Does that mean being Christ-like? So the question I have is that how do you mobilize a church? There are so many godly people in this country desperately praying for changes, for revival, for revolution, to resistance. But we don't have a leader to help us doing that. But in the meantime, this verse asks us to be holy and righteous.
Yeah, so that's a beautiful question. So I've actually been thinking a lot about righteousness. So 3 examples of the word righteous in Hebrew in the book of Genesis. So Noah is called righteous, Abraham is called righteous, and Joseph is called righteous. But there's a lot of reasons why they're called righteous. Noah is not called plainly righteous. He said he was a righteous man amongst those in his generation. Because it was a pretty messed up time. It was like, all right, this guy Noah, he's like the least bad option. Joseph is just strange, honestly. He's called beautiful, righteous. He was just exceptional. Abraham is the answer. Because Abraham is called righteous for a reason. It's not because of him, it's by his faith. How do we make the church righteous? It's by faith. That's the answer. And and by the way, to get the label righteous is a big deal in the Torah. So we know Noah was relatively righteous. Joseph is just this outlier. By faith, how do we keep things holy? We keep them separate. We keep them distinct. We must understand that the holy also deserves protection because the enemy wants to profane the holy constantly. There is a reason why the Satanists go after, in the Catholic tradition, they go after the Eucharist. They break into churches across the world. It's actually, if you've ever studied this, it's really wild. They're drawn to trying to break in what they believe is the incarnate body of Christ. Why is it that they go after to burn Bibles all the time? If there's no power to the Bible, why do they have to burn it all the time? So yeah, I love that scripture in Revelation 22, but I'll just say this. We also must protect the holy. And we do that by exposing the deeds of darkness with faith, as it says in Ephesians 5. Thank you. All right, we're out of questions. Final thoughts, James.
Yeah, so this is exactly what we've been talking about all evening. This is, the righteousness. This is this obedience. But the problem at the beginning is that the Marxists or the devil, however you want to phrase it, it's the same thing, are very confusing. Marx, one of his favorite words, and of course what he did is he projected it on his enemy. So he said capitalism does this, but they always confess by projection. They say what they are doing and say the other people are doing it. And so one of his favorite words is mystification, and I think that's a very important word. He says that capitalism mystifies people into believing that private property is good and all this. And the truth is that Marxism mystifies people. So if you want the church to be able to stand in righteousness, if you want to be able to protect that which is holy and defend what is holy, if you want to be able to love and fear the truth and protect the truth and stand for the truth and speak the truth, all of these things are going to require that we lift the mystification and get back to discernment. It's going to require, I think that part of the problem with the church is that it's been sleepy, it's groggy, it's not been paying attention, but it's not entirely that it's not been paying attention, it's that it has been mystified. Imagine it very much like that the spell has been cast on good, normal American people, many of whom go to church and have brought the spell with them, and they can't clearly see right and wrong. They hear love your neighbor, and they're like, well, does that mean wear a mask or don't wear a mask? What does that mean? They're mystified, they're confused. And so what we have to do is work hard to get clarity for ourselves, and not to use an airplane analogy, but you got to put your mask on first before you help somebody else with the oxygen. You got to get your mind clear. You've got to get your feet on the ground. You've got to get clear in what you understand about the world. You got to get based, Charlie, based in or the
Bible.
Truth, based in the Bible, you've got to understand clearly and then bring that to other people and help them get clear, help them see through the distortions. I had Trump derangement syndrome as bad as anybody in 2016. I was completely convinced he's, the next dictator. Everything the media said, I was completely convinced of it. Then somebody brought and said, hey, you remember that very fine people thing? They said, why don't you watch the whole clip in context? And he sent me a 2.5-minute video clip. I watched it. I was like, they lied about him. And all of a sudden, it was just like watching bricks fall out of a wall. What else did they lie about? Oh my God, they lied about this, they lied about that. What else are they lying about? They're probably lying about the aliens. What are they lying about? And that is how you start to demystify people. That's actually the truth, and it will bring the church back to being able to protect what's holy, being able to discern what's holy, and that goes back to understanding separations, distinctions, clarity, because reality is a reality of distinctions.
I will say this, James, I pray the American pastor community can be as clear and as courageous as you are on these topics. Because, James, by the way, I'm working on him, just so you know. We're going to dinner later, and he has to hear all about the logos and all sorts of fun stuff. I'm not giving up, James, you know.
We did have the miracle of the steak, Charlie.
That's right. And we're working on it. It's my personal project. It is. So pray for James, pray for me. And I'll say this, though. I really, truly love people that fight for what is good. It drives me nuts when people say, Charlie, I'm done. I believe in Jesus, I'm waiting for his return, or I have nothing to do. Although James is not of our faith, I can say this. He acts with more boldness and courage than most people that call themselves Christians. And that is righteous in my view. God bless every you guys, and thank you, James, so much. Thank you.